It's been 20 years since Castlevania Symphony of the Night took the gaming world by surprise with its fresh take on the vampire hunting franchise and turned the world of the Belmont clan upside down, literally in some cases. Hi, I'm Brendan with the Leaderboard, and this is 107 facts about Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Let's get started. Castlevania Symphony of the Night starts off with the ending battle of the game that came before it, in Castlevania Rondo of Blood. The boss battle is between Dracula and Richter Belmont, who goes missing after he defeats Dracula. While the opening battle was from the previous game, Rondo of Blood was actually only released in Japan in October 1993. It was finally released for American audiences in March 2010. The original working title for Symphony of the Night was Castlevania The Bloodletting. Many believe that Koji Igarashi was the primary director on Symphony of the Night, however, it was Toru Hagihara. Hagihara is also responsible for Rondo of Blood as well. Igarashi was the assistant director for Symphony of the Night and went on to be the producer of the entire franchise. When Igarashi started at Konami, his first big hit was a game called Tokimeki Memorial, a high school dating simulation. It did so well that Konami originally wanted him to direct a sequel, but he refused. Konami came to Igarashi and told him that since Tokimeki Memorial had received great ratings, but since he did not want to work on a sequel game, he could then pick from the list of games that the company was going to start working on. Symphony of the Night immediately caught his eye. Castlevania Symphony of the Night was merely seen as a spin-off game to the original Castlevania titles, and because of this, Igarashi and Hagihara were able to experiment with the game as much as they wanted, with little or no protest from Konami. Igarashi stated in an interview that he, quote, wished to create a game which could be enjoyed for a long time. Many action games at the time could be taken and played rather quickly, and he wanted Symphony of the Night to have a story and gameplay that were memorable. Igarashi chose to have players experience this Castlevania game as Alucard rather than another member of the Belmont clan, allowing the player to see the new Alucard who has grown into his powers. Igarashi was concerned about making Alucard the lead character because although he enjoys him, he was worried longtime fans would be angered, since it was the first time for the series to have a non-whip using character as the hero. The game adopted the idea of experience points. Players leveling up their character and having the ability to heal with potions or food had never been done in one of these titles before, and Igarashi wanted the game to seem less intimidating to newcomers. One of the more important and bold features added to Symphony of the Night was the new mapping system. While it was extremely similar to that of the Metroid maps, it tweaked itself just enough to be different. Every room Alucard entered would have a map found by pressing the select button that would show the player where he or she hasn't visited yet. Igarashi stated that maps should promote exploration, but also have limits. He wanted players to revisit certain maps, and when they did, they'd be rewarded with new items, which would help to keep the player's attention. Because the development team wanted to make a larger map to explore, they opted to make the game in 2D instead of 3D. They had many different items and settings that they wanted to program into the game that would be too difficult to render in 3D, and so they had a very experienced team of 2D renderers. Symphony of the Night was slated to debut on the PlayStation, and it was a risk to render the game in 2D at that point due to the fact that PlayStation's 2D picture quality wasn't too solid. Igarashi sat down with a translator and Castlevania speedrunner to figure out if there were any bugs in the game. At one point, Igarashi and his team realized that if they were to flip the castle upside down and add new enemies for certain parts of it, that they would be creating twice the content, which only added to the success and doubled the size of the game. Seems like Castlevania found the upside down decades before Will Byers stumbled into it. Hagihara mentioned that in early stages of development, he and the team originally planned for an alignment system for weapons. If the player ended up using more sub-weapons, Alucard would end up with a holy alignment, whereas Alucard was using more magic and magic-based weapons, he would end up with a dark alignment. Hagihara and Igarashi had also intended on creating two different endings based on whether or not Alucard ended up with a holy or dark alignment. While retouching the series for Symphony of the Night, Igarashi decided to do away with the instant deaths that came from misjudging a jump and falling to the floor. Instead, he decided to reward the players by having Alucard land in a new space for them to explore, and then backtrack to the original goal at hand. The team behind Symphony of the Night wanted to revamp, get it, the art direction for this game, and in doing so, they brought out a talented illustrator who had little to no experience in the video game world, Ayami Kojima. They felt that Kojima's work had a rich aesthetic and could make the game series fresh again, something to really sink our teeth into. Kojima took inspiration from Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula film adaptation for her character designs for Symphony of the Night. Maria's green jumper shows similarities to Winona Ryder's dresses throughout the film, while the priest shaft wears deep red robes mirroring that of Gary Oldman's character. Kojima's art style also leaned more towards the character designs that the video game players were seeing in games like Final Fantasy, which helped Symphony of the Night to stand out amongst its peers. With the change in art style, Igarashi was also able to change the sizes of the characters, but this did not come without some complications. Alucard ended up up taking up more space on screen, and because of this the sizes of his weapons also needed to change to be in proportion with him, since they ended up being comically large and hard to play with. Michiru Yamane, the composer for the Symphony of the Night soundtrack, was about to go into her 4th year of college when she was hired by Konami to create gothic Victorian-style soundtracks. While Yamane's big break was Symphony of the Night, she had worked on Rondo of Blood and several other non-Castlevania games before that. Yamane had some influence for the direction of Symphony of the Night based on sound, though at times she needed to change some of her vision so that she and Igarashi would be more on the same page. Yamane took components from rock, classical music, and jazz to compose the soundtrack that fans adore even today. Igarashi's favorite song in the game is Castle Dracula. He mentions that he may be biased, seeing as it appears in the part of the game that he programmed himself. Igarashi mentioned that the key to success with a Metroidvania-type game is to relieve the player of any major stress they might feel. In Symphony of the Night, this was done by making the character fun to play, while having the option to switch and apply different moves and items. Metroidvania is a term that comes from the combination of the words Metroid and Castlevania, and it is now a common term in the video game world to describe any game that borrows from the two. Symphony of the Night took gameplay elements from the Metroid games, such as side-scrolling platform exploration, along with a non-linear set of labyrinths and catacombs to unlock. Whereas Metroid kept its combat simple, Symphony of the Night was able to upgrade to a more complex weapon play that added more weapons to the game overall. Symphony of the Night rewards players for exploring the castle's many halls and dungeons instead of relying on different levels to change the scenery and set the story. Castlevania Symphony of the Night was released in March of 1997 in Japan and October of 1997 in the United States. The Japanese title for Symphony of the Night is Akamojo Dracula X, Gekka no Yasou Kyoku, which translates to Demon Castle Dracula X, Nocturne in the Moonlight. Igarashi originally used X in the Japanese title for the game to show that it was part of the main game series, and was satisfied to see that it has now become commonplace for the newer Castlevania games. There was a manga titled Nocturne in the Moonlight that came with the Japanese release of the game. This manga first appeared in Konami magazine in 1997. It was only one page of the manga and was a tease for Symphony of the Night. The introduction to Symphony of the Night was narrated in Japanese, while the American release only had words scrolling down the screen for players to read. In this game, players follow Alucard, a Damphir or half-human, half-vampire, who is the son of Dracula, as he explores Dracula's castle and tries to destroy him. Alucard once served his father, but was convinced that spreading his evil was wrong and chose to work alongside Trevor Belmont to kill him. Alucard had been asleep since the end of Castlevania 3, but has been awoken to help solve the mystery reappearance of Dracula's castle and to find Richter Belmont. Not the best way to wake up from a nap. Dracula's castle is said to appear every 100 years, but for some unknown reason, it has returned only 5 years after Richter fought and supposedly killed Dracula himself. Alucard is the first main playable character in the Castlevania series who is not a part of the Belmont clan. This started a number of changes for the future of the series, including player characters and art style. Alucard also appears in other Castlevania games, such as Castlevania Legends, Dracula's Curse, Aria of Sorrow, and Dawn of Sorrow. He is a playable character in each of those games except for Legends and Aria of Sorrow. Maria Renard is the other main character in Symphony of the Night, however she is not a playable character. Maria also made appearances in Rondo of Blood and Dracula X before this. In the Japanese Castlevania Dracula X manual, it states that Maria Renard is a distant relative of the Belmonts, but in the American Symphony of the Night player manual, it states that she is not related to the Belmonts by blood. Within the first stage of the game, Alucard runs into Maria, who is in search of Richter Belmont. Elizabeth Bellery and Gilles de Rais were supposed to appear as characters in Symphony of the Night, but unfortunately ended up in the cutting room floor. Instead of keeping the traditional whip that the past Castlevania games had as the main character's weapon of choice, Igarashi thought that Alucard would play with a slew of different weapons that were hidden in different rooms throughout the castle. The variety of weapons in the game is also due to many of the staff members liking different types of blades. Unfortunately, no one realized till later that nobody really loved shields, and Furukawa said that that became a bit of a blind spot for them. There are several items that never made it into the game, one of which was the flashing treasure chest that gave the player $5,000 when picked up after slashing candles and destroying a room, much like Zelda. It was intended to give more money than any other item in the game. Symphony of the Night was initially planned to have much more dialogue, but Igarashi felt as though the deep backstory would get in the way of the game's progression, so it was taken out. When characters died in-game, the voice actors recorded lines that would break the music as the screen loaded to start the game up again. These lines were translated and recorded in English, but never actually made it into the game. Igarashi's favorite line in the game is Alucard's final line when battling Dracula. "Trouble the soul of my mother no more." He claims that Alucard's dialogue is empty or emotionless throughout the rest of the game, but he gives us that peek into his human side at the very end. The original ending was where Alucard battles and defeats Richter Belmont, but many players desired to go back and explore all the rooms they may have missed. Once certain items have been found, players can unlock a secret level that doubles the game's size and is now more challenging than the game that came before it. Developers decided to hide a secret ending into Symphony of the Night where players can explore a mirrored version of Dracula's castle. Igarashi said that Galamoth is the toughest enemy to beat and was designed so that if you tried just to fight him normally, you couldn't win. In the game, Alucard has a secret boots item, which says increases height discreetly, and when attached, it actually does make Alucard a couple pixels taller. Alucard can be hurt by water, but there's an item in the game known simply as the Holy Symbol that allows him to go underwater without taking any damage. It's just a snorkel, guys. The Grand Falloon, an enemy found within Dracula's castle, also found in Harmony of Dissonance and Area of Sorrow, was actually known as Legion in Japan. While exploring the castle, Alucard can peer through a telescope and see a man rowing a small boat out on the lake in front of the castle. If the player does not find this room and look through the scope, then Alucard cannot be ferried across the water when the need arises later in the game. At the bottom of the outer wall beneath the telescope room, you will see a small bird's nest. If you wait a bit, you'll see a bird arrive and perch in the nest. Keep exiting and re-entering the room, and you will see that the bird has laid eggs, which then hatch, grow up, and start a nest of their own. Igarashi and Hagihara both decided that within their own headcanon, even though Alucard is Dracula's son, he has the ability to use holy weapons through his mother's lineage. She must have been descended from a holy bloodline. They also said that Alucard has both the powers of light and dark. The song Nocturne was supposed to be sung by the sprite, or fairy, familiar, but never actually made its way into the game in Japan or America. The only way to have been able to get the sprite to sing was to use Game Shark codes. The fairy and demon familiars were actually changed to the sprite and nose demon familiars for the American release of the game. On a rare occasion, instead of turning into his natural petrified form, Alucard will instead shapeshift into a gargoyle statue and is invulnerable to any enemy attacks. Both Alucard and Dracula share the surname of Tepes, which comes from Bram Stoker's original inspiration for Dracula in his novel. The name comes from real-life Romanian prince Vlad Tepes, also known as Vlad the Impaler. An homage to real-life Tepes can be found in the game, though it's pretty subtle. When using the magic spell Power of Sire, which does massive damage to all enemies on screen, players can see a portrait of Vlad appear behind Alucard until the spell ends. There's a set of armor that players can get known as the Axe Armor. Once players obtain this set, they have the ability to start the game over with the armor and do a second playthrough in it. The image of Dracula's castle that's depicted on the cover of Symphony of the Night was inspired by the Mount Saint Michel Abbey, which is built on a rocky hillside in Normandy, France. Can you imagine a French Dracula? It was just the red wine all along. There's a room in Dracula's castle where Alucard can sit and speak with the ghost of a priest. After they sit at a table together, weapons come from behind a curtain and stab Alucard. The players can then go to the other side of the table and the ghost of a crying woman appears, but nothing happens beyond that. This is the only room in the castle where characters like those appear and is never discussed as to why they show up there in the first place. Players will meet a good priest who does not hurt Alucard, although he will occasionally leave grape juice behind. On the other side of the table, Alucard can occasionally meet the ghost of the crying woman who stabs him instead. If the player summons Alucard's bat familiar and then has Alucard turn into a bat himself, the familiar will fall in love with Alucard. Players see little hearts come out from the familiar, but if Alucard changes form again, a question mark will appear above the bat's head. If Alucard stands still for an extended period of time, his familiar will perch on his shoulder. Once he starts moving, she will fall off and yelp in surprise. In the reversed Colosseum of the mirrored version of Dracula's castle, Alucard must fight Trevor Belmont, Sophia Belnades, and Grant Danasty, who were all his party members in Castlevania 3, Dracula's Curse. The Colosseum in Dracula's castle was decorated with the carcass of the behemoth who chases after Richter Belmont in Rondo of Blood. If players sit Alucard down in a chair and leave him for a minute or two, he will drift off to sleep, with little Z images appearing above his head until he gets moving again. Don't forget, even half vampires gotta sleep. When Alucard is shifted into an animal form, he has the potential to get stuck in small corners. Instead of the game simply glitching and having to start over or retreat to a save point, it acknowledges the mix-up and has him yelp in confusion. The stone mask item that debuts in Symphony of the Night is an homage to the manga JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, where it turns Dio Brando into a vampire after finding it in Joestar's library. The library in Dracula's castle has audio clips from the voice cast in Japan, while in America it was dubbed over with more of the game's soundtrack. There are several healing items in the game, one notably being peanuts. What's weird about this is that due to the way Alucard attaches items, he has to throw them before he can use/eat them. This particular instance leads to the player having to throw the peanuts so that Alucard can catch them in his mouth, but not before striking a pose. Karasuman is a recurring boss character in Castlevania that is from Japanese and Christian mythology. It comes from the Japanese word karasu, meaning crow. If the game CD were to be played as an audio track, it reveals a hidden song and has a recording of Alucard warning the owner of the disc not to put it into an audio player.
As you can see, this is a PlayStation Black disc. Cut number 1 contains computer data so please don't play it. But you probably won't listen to me anyway, will you?
Whoops. While players loved Symphony of the Night in Japan, European and American sales were so low that many retailers had to discount the game to get it off the shelves. The English dialogue is well known for its cheesy delivery and somewhat off sound, but certain lines have now become popular catchphrases that fans can identify within seconds. The opening of Symphony of the Night starts off with Dracula overdramatically asking Richter Belmont, "What is man? A miserable little pile of secrets. But enough talk. Have at you!" Developers for Symphony of the Night were getting initial feedback from players stating that they felt the game was too easy to get through because of the newly added RPG elements that made gameplay different from Castlevanias that came before. Many female fans had positive reactions to the game, partially because of its playstyle and also because of the shift in art direction. The character being a suave, tall, half-vampire as opposed to one of the beefy, whip-wielding Belmonts definitely helped to bring in the new crop of players as well. And this was nearly a decade before the Twilight craze. Team Alucard all the way! Many players who had never played the original Castlevania games were intrigued and eventually sucked into the beautiful new setting that Igarashi and Hagihara had created. Others were thrown off and even disappointed at first by the more retro look and feel of the 2D platformer, but once they started playing and really exploring the true depth of the game, they came to realize what a treasure it actually is. It's been the perfect example of don't judge a book by its cover. Igarashi didn't want to fall more into the trap of creating a game for mature and experienced players. Quote, "It's vital to place importance on the experience of first-time players." Many fans were wishing for an updated remake of Symphony of the Night with fully orchestrated versions of the soundtrack, updated dialogue, and beautiful renderings that could be released on the newest PlayStation system. Because the PlayStation was moving towards 3D polygonal characters and environments, the 2D look did not help sell Symphony of the Night, but due to the critical praise and word of mouth from diehard Castlevania fans, it ended up doing well in sales despite this fact. Fans have expressed that they prefer the silly, somewhat corny dialogue of the original release as opposed to the cleaner, updated version that was retranslated in Dracula X Chronicles. Fans love the twist ending where it turns out that Richter has been, while under the control of Shaft, behind the reappearance of Dracula's castle, and the fact that you can save and redeem him while going on to fight Dracula in the mirrored version of the castle. As of May 2017, Symphony of the Night has sold more than 1.27 million units worldwide. IDW Comics ran a Castlevania title in 2005 called Castlevania: The Belmont Legacy, and followed the player character Christopher Belmont in the Game Boy games. IGN rated Symphony of the Night 9 out of 10, while Metacritic gave it a 93 out of 100, and many, if not most, players who've completed the game consider it to be one of the best games to be released on the original PlayStation. Symphony of the Night proved to the world that 2D gaming, while thought to be dead at that point, was not even close to being over with as long as detail and inventive gameplay are incorporated. In May 2015, YouTuber EgoRaptor did a playthrough of Symphony of the Night on his channel Game Grumps to help give notice and fund Igarashi's newest Castlevania-inspired game. Igarashi announced in 2017 that he is leaving Konami to create more independent games on his own, which saddened fans a bit to know that the co-creator of one of their favorite games would no longer be with the company, who may continue to release more titles based on the series. Igarashi and Michiru Yamane are currently working on Igarashi's new project, Ritual of the Night, that launched on Kickstarter back in 2015. On July 7th, 2017, Netflix released an original animated Castlevania series co-produced by our very own Frederator Studios, with the first teaser trailer having been released in May of this year. If you want to know more about that though, you should check out Cartoon Hangover's 7 Facts about the Castlevania series. Producer Adi Shankar says that the TV series is the Castlevania story very much done in the vein of Game of Thrones. In the game Metal Gear Solid, released by Konami in 1998, the boss Psycho Mantis will read the player's mind by parsing through their memory card. If the game reads that there's a Symphony of the Night save file on the card, Mantis will taunt you, "You like Castlevania, don't you?" Symphony of the Night celebrated its 20th anniversary on March 20th, 2017. Well, there you have it! Once again, I'm Brendan, and thanks for watching 107 Facts about Castlevania Symphony of the Night. What's your favorite part of the game? Did we miss any Easter eggs? Comment below and let us know. Don't forget to click the bell icon to become part of the notification squad, and if you like getting more from your games, subscribe to the Leaderboard, where we help you game smarter.